Good morning. On behalf of the state treasurer, Mr. Boykin. Ms. Hendricks.
Here.
Ms. Vargas. On behalf of the director of finance, Ms. Ortega. Chairperson Yee, you have a quorum.
Good morning, everyone. So why don't we move on to the first item on the agenda, first item is approval of the committee agenda. Any discussion, comments? Hearing none. Okay. Motion to approve. Second. Ms. Hendricks, without objection. Yes.
I'm sorry, Controller Yee. I think we might. I think there was a suggestion to take items.
Yes. Let me do that. I'm sorry. You're right. Members, for just the flow of the agenda today, I'm going to propose that we move items 5 and 6 to be considered right after item 4, so that we can have our governance education forum without interruption. And okay, is that without objection? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Moving on to item 2. This is an update on our board policy manual, just some technical updates, and let me turn to Jill for that. Good morning.
Thank you, Chairperson Yee, members of the committee. So this item is intended to address some revisions to the board policy manual that will enhance the administration of certain policies and improve accuracy and consistency. Essentially, the purpose is to clarify some of the compliance requirements, some issues that have been raised by staff and vendors over time. So the first grouping has to do with Section 600H of the board policy manual, which is the disclosure of campaign contributions and gifts. This is a form that is filled out by our vendors, and part of the policy involves statement of the gift limit, which in the policy it states $390, which is likely the gift limit at the time that the policy was last revised. So the current gift limit is $460, and the proposed revisions are basically intended so that we don't have to revise the board policy manual every 2 years. So if you look at Board Gov 4, the language that we are proposing essentially changes from a monetary limit to just state the current monetary limit established by the Fair Political Practices Commission. So that will ease the maintenance of this policy so that we don't have to revise it every couple of years. The second issue with 600H has to do with when the annual forms should be filed. There's no stated date in the policy at this time, and so the intention is to state a date, April 1st, so that we don't have to track every single contract when the annual time has come, so that everybody just files at the same time every year. So that will help with compliance and streamlining that process. The second grouping has to do with the no contact policy, and it was brought to our attention by staff that the revisions that we did last year now are unclear as to whether the policy applies to staff, which it does. So the proposed revisions are just to clarify that the policy applies to both CalSTRS staff and board members. That's how the policy was worded previously, and just somehow with the revisions that we did, it just became unclear. So it's just meant to clarify that. The third grouping is really just technical housekeeping. We did a bunch of revisions to sections 500 and 600 last year, and there were a lot of sections that were rearranged. And so there are cross-references to policies that were incorrect. So we went back through the board policy manual to make sure that the cross-references matched up to the policies the way they are currently organized. And that's pretty much it for that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Jill. Questions, members? Okay. Mr. Rosenstiel.
So I'm a little confused. I didn't really understand something here. I thought we were revising this so we wouldn't have to revise it in the future, that it would keep up with changes in FPPC rules, but it said on Board Gov 4, it should be renoted that revising the policy language as recommended would require updates every 2 years when the FPPC revises the gift limit. So
Yeah, I reread that too. I think the intention was to state that the way that it's currently worded would require us to revise it every 2 years. So it's just a misstatement.
policy,
Right.
not the
Not the recommended
revising the
revisions.
policy. Okay, so
Correct.
that was that. So revising the policy would eliminate the need.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Sharon?
Does that mean then, I guess I just want to understand, then from that, does that mean we just would revise it as needed on an ongoing basis then? Is that what that means, or?
The policy would essentially be static because it will just say that it will comply with the FPPC requirements. So it wouldn't have to be revised, but the gift limit would increase over time depending on when the FPPC revises that. So,
But the language we're using actually allows us to not have to even update that, right? Because
Right,
it just
correct.
links to FPPC. So-
correct.
Okay, got it. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. Other discussion, members? Okay, this is an action item. Is there a motion to approve? Okay, motion by Mr. Boykin, second by Ms. Hendricks, without objection. The updates are adopted. Thank you. Thank you, Jill. Okay, next item is approval of the minutes from the November 5th, 2015 board meeting. I believe they're before you. Okay, motion by Ms. Hendricks, second by Ms. Vargas. Without objection, those minutes are approved. Great. Thank you. Then we are going to jump to item number 5, board accountability and compliance, and let me turn that over to Mr. Bardo and to Ms. Lukens.
Actually, with your permission, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Lukens.
Okay.
So this is a continuation of the effort to track and refine the compliance requirements for board members. If you recall, last time we went through the board policy manual and prepared a summary of some of the compliance functions that the board members are required to comply with. And that included, it was more broad, so it included certain things like the no contact policy and other issues. What we did here was we distilled it down even further to essentially items that are deliverables, things that board members have to file, sign, that sort of thing, that are listed in the board policy manual. And so the attachment that is included on item 5 is essentially just a checklist for those deliverables and is intended to help board members with understanding what they have to comply with and when they have to file certain things. So that was the intention of this item.
Questions, members? Yes, Paul.
So is it the board member's responsibility to initiate this? In other words, like the first 3 things or attestations or affirmations that we were supposed to have done by last week. Now, I to be honest, I didn't do any of those. I'm not sure other board members have either. I didn't get a reminder that I should have done that, which might have been, something we should put into practice. We get a notice every year about filing Form 700. So I would like to suggest that we incorporate into this that there's a little bit more that we should not. That's not just that the executive office would annually collect these, but the executive office would annually give us a reminder, send us the document, and receive them if that would be possible.
Yes.
I believe, I'm sorry, Jay, I believe that is our intention to actually fold it into our compliance program, which would then have a series of reminders, and then it would be incumbent upon staff to provide the necessary forms until we get them available electronically, similar to our Form 700, but you still get the reminders. So it is actually, the intent is actually to get us there so that we are assisting the board members in compliance and then having accurate records to track all of that.
Can you send us these things we were supposed to?
Yeah, you should have it, you should have it in front,
Oh, they are?
you should have it right in front of you.
We haven't.
I was looking at it actually while
Thank
we were.
you. Thank you.
Actually, Paul, we had another question from a board member earlier in the month that Jill and I fielded. Same question, which was for this first cycle. It was just because you were looking at this today, we brought the packet to you. But, so we need to remind all the board members when they come that that's for today's completion.
Mr. Morgan, great.
Thanks. And with respect to the folder and all the forms, so I don't think I'm alone. Probably the superintendent's office and the controller's office, we have a number of people who are designated to sit on the board.
There's a folder for each person.
What?
There'll be a folder for each delegate.
Okay, so, yeah, and I'm happy to sort of be the conduit for the
Okay.
treasurer's office
Yeah.
and make sure everybody gets the forms.
Yeah, since each of you are a board member, everyone needs to have full compliance. So, yeah, Danielle, of course, is preparing that for you.
Right now, I only see one folder up here, so if I can
Yeah.
get others, that'd be great.
So I just wanted to, excuse me, so the forms that we just got are these first, three items? The gift policy or attestation, code of conduct, insider trader policy. Is that right? That's in here. Form 700, you do remind us about, but these are new processes and compliances that we're doing besides the Form 700, the first three.
So
'Cause this is the first
those
I've
have traditionally been, the gift policy went into effect, I think, 2014. So that one, I think the first time that there was an annual was last year. But, and the intention here also, most of these policies don't state the due date, the annual due date. So again, this was a moving forward deadline so that we can establish some sort of drop date for filing those. But certainly, we will work with the executive office to develop a procedure on how the forms will be administered and that sort of thing.
Okay. Great, thank you. Any other comments, ma'am? Okay, great. Thank you for bringing that forward. Why don't we move on to item number 6? This is the update about our organization of reports. And Jill, let me turn it back over to you and Amy.
So I've been working with staff on looking at the different groupings of reports and how those will be addressed with the committees. Investment committee has definitely taken, or the investment staff has definitely taken an active role in looking at their reports and consulting their consultants and all of their investment staff, getting input about how those reports can be modified or what changes need to be made or recommendations in that regard. And they actually have a probably a majority of the reports. I think I counted 30-something reports are involved with the investment committee. So that's going to be a big chunk of evaluating. And that's actually an item on the investment committee agenda today. It's item 17, or tomorrow, for the investment committee. So that will be addressed by the investment committee, and I'm sure they'll have a lengthy report about that. Also, I've been in talks with financial services about some of the reports that have to do with the audits and operations. They're also well on their way to evaluating their list of reports. And then I believe probably at the next Board Governance Committee meeting, we'll have an item on the agenda as well to discuss some of the governance reports and get working on those. So that's where we are.
Comments, members? I just want to thank you, Jill and Amy and Brian, for continuing to really streamline this process. And I know just with respect to putting this in the purview of the respective committees, it's really given us an opportunity to do some good evaluation about what's still appropriate going forward. So thank you. Thank you for all the great work. Okay. Harry?
Thanks, Ms. Xu. Before you move to the next items, all of these compliance issues, I just want to express my gratitude to Jill, Ms. Lukens, Mr. Bartow, and their team. In the time that I've been on the board, I've grown to learn to just turn to you and ask your team for help in filling out forms, what needs to be reported, when it needs to be reported. And you're a tremendous resource. We're lucky to have you. I just encourage my fellow board members who haven't relied on you and turned to you. You're there to help us complete all of these forms and to comply with all of the laws as they're stated. So express my gratitude. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Harry. Great, thank you. All right, members, now we come back to item number 4, which is our education forum today. Let me do this. I want to just maybe turn it over to Amy to just make some opening remarks, and I'm happy to make the introduction of our speaker.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Good morning. Amy McDuffie with the Fiduciary Services Practice of Aon Hewitt Investment Consulting. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I am very pleased to have a special speaker here also from Aon Hewitt Investment Consulting, Mr. Steve Cummings, who is our North American head of our investment consulting practice. And back at the October offsite, there was a discussion that the board had on consultant evaluations and how to maximize the value, how to measure value of your consulting relationships. I believe at that point in time, there was a request for a further conversation. And so given the fact that we had an education session planned for the committee today, the idea was to lay some groundwork on the industry itself, how it's evolved over time, where it may be going in the future, and opportunities for you as a board to optimize and maximize the client-consultant relationship. So with that, Madam Chair, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Cummings and allow him to interact with the committee and take your questions and provide some additional perspective.
Mr. Cummings, first of all, welcome and good morning. Just in terms of where this education forum will lead, there's been a lot of interest expressed by many of you for looking at how we do optimize our board's investment consulting relationships especially, and so I do anticipate follow-up after today at some point in the investment committee to look at how we may want to look at revisiting some of our expectations for our consultants and being better informed after today's session, hopefully. That you have Steve's bio in your materials, and I believe you have the PowerPoint as well that he will be walking through. But I'm just glad that he's here. This is someone who's very highly regarded in the industry and has been responsible for leading hundreds of investment consultants. And I think if there was an eye in terms of what the industry looks like, what's on the horizon, and looking at best practices, we couldn't have asked for a better person to join us this morning. So with that, welcome, Steve.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. It's great to be with you. It's a big topic, optimizing investment consulting relationships, and I'm happy to go down any direction this morning with you that you would like to. I have prepared just a few slides that I'll speak to. I would encourage you to interrupt me at any point. I don't have a lot of material here, but I do have a fair amount of history in the industry. This is my 30th year in the investment consulting industry, so I've seen a lot of the history that I'm going to walk through briefly before getting to a couple of the other issues that I've been asked to perhaps discuss with you today. So I've got 4 topics: a brief history of the industry. I wanted to spend a few minutes on the economics of the investment consulting industry, how we think about pricing our services, the pressures that face consultants of various types and sizes in the industry. Give you a couple comments on where I think the current state of the industry is and where it's going. And then lastly, I have a few ideas that might be provocative, perhaps, but I've been told this board is interested in using your very, very esteemed stature in the investment institutional industry to perhaps set precedent or maybe move in directions that peers have not yet moved. So I've taken the liberty of adding some provocative ideas towards the end of my time with you today that I'm happy to discuss with you. So let me start with history here. I've taken the liberty of breaking the investment consulting world down into 4 time periods that I think are important just to give you a sense of from where we have all come. Those of us that have been in the industry for decades, those of us that are joining firms or serving firms that have been around for decades. The business really got its start after the passage of ERISA, which applies to the corporate space, as you well know. And the broker-dealer community was the early entrance into the investment consulting industry, and they provided performance evaluation services as a part of providing trade execution services. So you got Back in those days, SCI was the firm that was most well known. They had big green books with lots and lots of data in it that told you what your results were for free as part of the trading activity that they did on behalf of the investment managers that were serving the industry. In 1980, I've described this 80 to 95 period as the emergence of the consultancies. Most of the firms that were founded in the early part of that time frame were founded by individuals that left the broker-dealer industry. They decided that they didn't like the idea of trading securities. They wanted to be in the business of advising plan sponsors, institutional investors. And so it turned out the barriers to entry were very, very small back in those days. You didn't need much. There was very few regulatory hurdles other than making sure that you had access to the information. And so without a lot of barriers of entry and a high demand for the services, there was a real explosion of providers of investment consulting services. There's a couple of characteristics that mark that period of time that are important as it relates to the next topic, which is the economics. The majority of firms that were created back in the 1980s through the mid-1990s were compensated exclusively or meaningfully in the form of what are referred to as soft dollars. And that may be a term that's well known by the committee members, but essentially it is using commissions associated with trading that go to a brokerage firm to get rebated back to the benefit of the plan sponsor whose activity caused the trading activity to occur to offset consulting fees. So it made it not free anymore, but it made it fairly inexpensive to use investment consultants, since it was a service that was paid for in total or in part by the natural trading activity associated with the investment of those plan assets. What happened towards the mid-1990s that caused us to move into what I refer to as the rise of the generalist and the specialist is a couple of things. One was a growing concern amongst plan sponsors that linking the compensation of their advisor to the trading activity of the managers that those advisors recommended created a potential for a conflict of interest favoring more active trading strategies and less buy and hold strategies, which don't provide enough volume of commissions to offset those consulting fees. This is about the time that the idea of index funds became more commonly known, and index funds, as you well know, generally do not trade a great deal compared to active strategies. So the level of commission volume would fall, which in turn was causing the out-of-pocket costs of the investment consultants to rise. So what happened is the business shifted from soft dollar focused to very much fee only focused during this time period. The other dynamic that was going on was investors were moving outside of U.S. equities and starting to introduce non-U.S. equities, and they were beginning to introduce into their investment programs illiquid assets such as real estate and private equity. So the skills that you needed from an investment advisor were no longer limited to somebody that could opine about large cap value and large cap growth, but somebody that could help you with micro cap, non-U.S. equities, real estate, and private equity. So the emergence of specialty consulting firms are characterized by the 1995 to 2005 period. It was also the period of time where consultants began to incorporate the liabilities in the advice that they gave plan sponsors. Instead of just looking at asset-only information, they started looking at the liabilities those assets were designed to defease and the funding mechanisms that brought capital into so there was a more holistic approach to advising on the investments. And that brings me to the last period, which I call beginning of the revolution. This has been very interesting for all of us. The birth of OCIO, which is the outsourced chief investment officer, that industry has been around for a long time, but I mark its real birth to 2009. Only 6-7 years ago is when this industry really started to blossom. About 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to review a marketing brochure from an organization that was trying to provide kind of comparative analysis for OCIO providers in the U.S. And this was in 2014. At that point, there were over 130 organizations that in the U.S. that claimed to be providing outsourced chief investment officer solutions. I would hazard to guess that 7 years ago, that number was about 6 or 7. So it really has been a dramatic change in the industry. And for those of you that are not familiar with the OCIO business, it's essentially investment consultants and investment management organizations who have said, we will implement on behalf of a plan sponsor all or a part of your investment program. We will no longer advise you and let you be the decision maker as it relates to which managers to use or how to rebalance amongst them, but we will do it on your behalf, either as an investment consultant or as an investment manager, a fund manager. And as you might imagine, that increased level of reliance, whether it's at the investment consultant level or with the investment manager level, comes with a commensurate increase in compensation. So it's a higher fee model than the traditional advisory services. The second point I make about the period of time we're in now is the shift from historians to solution providers. When our industry got started, including when I was in my early years in the industry, our main job in the investment consulting industry was to tell you what just happened to you. We'll come before you and give you a report that might be 3 months out of date, but it tells you what the markets did last quarter, last year, how you did relative to those markets, and whether or not you should be pleased or displeased by what happened to you. I refer to that as the historian feature of our service model. For the first 2 or 3 eras here, that was the primary job of an investment consultant. And the reason you were willing to pay investment consultants to provide that service to you is it was very difficult to get that information in a consolidated fashion any other way. And as fiduciaries, you needed to know how you did, what just happened to you. The reason I say there's a shift from historians to solution providers is that most of you have a device in front of you right now that could tell you what the stock market is doing today. I haven't looked at mine yet, but you don't need me to tell you what happened to the markets last quarter or even yesterday. Increasingly, you don't need me or my industry to tell you what happened to your investment portfolio. The information is much more commoditized, it's much more accurate, and it's much more timely. So what's happened is there's been a shift from relying on investment consultants to tell you what happened to you to helping you figure out what you want to happen next. And that's what I refer to as solution providers. It's a harder job. Looking in the rearview mirror is a lot easier than trying to find a way to plot the course forward. But that's the shift that has occurred over the last 10 to 15 years in the industry. Commensurately, there's been an awful lot of consolidation. If you look at the years here, firms that were founded in the early 80s are, in most cases, approaching generational turning points where the leadership is changing from founders to next generations. Some of those transitions have occurred. Some of them have yet to occur. So there has been a fair amount of consolidation, including my organization 6 years ago. There's also been an important change that I find very exciting, but it's also very challenging. And that's my last point here, which is the blurring of the lines. It used to be pretty clear where the role of the sponsor started and ended, and the investment consultant started and ended, the money manager started and ended, and the custodian started and ended. With the increase of large plan sponsors' use of internal investment teams and the increasing blurring of the lines between investment managers and investment consultants, and if you weren't aware of this, investment consultants are regulated exactly the same way investment managers are. We have the same securities law that we have to pay attention to, the same fiduciary standards that apply to the investment managers. So these days, we find ourselves in the investment consulting industry often competing not just against other investment consultants, but competing in a real sense against internal staff for advisory positions and investment managers. Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, Northern Trust are routine competitors of investment consultants these days when they didn't used to be. So this sense of clear and distinct roles for these different organizations have blurred. I think that's good for the plan sponsors because it allows you to have more options as you decide how you want to be advised. You no longer have to say, I need an investment consultant to do this and an investment manager to do that. In some cases, you can evaluate both businesses to provide services that you're looking for. So let me stop for a second before moving on and see if you have any questions about my brief run through the history of the industry. So far, so good. All right. The economics. Yes, sir.
Consultant. I mean, it seems to me that there's a difference between an investment consultant who's an investment consultant to the board's consultant. The board doesn't have the expertise that staff has, so the board has its consultant to advise it, not to advise the staff. Is there blurring there? I mean, we're not seeing Goldman Sachs wanting that job. I mean, isn't that? I mean, that's the purpose for which this board hires investment consultants.
That's a great question. There's a lot of organizations that that I would consider investment consultants that do very good jobs of advising boards at a very high level, but also do a very good job of serving as extensions of staffs. So there's organizations out there that do both and do both quite well. The investment management organizations are much more often going to be found as extensions of staff, strategic partners to staff, or providing access to a market or a set of information that's not otherwise available. It's rare that you would see those organizations serving as high-level advisors to the fiduciaries. That's a very good point and a distinction. Where we see the competition between investment consultants, traditional investment consultants, and traditional investment managers most keen is in the part of the space that's least likely to be applicable in your world, which is that OCIO space, where there's a delegation to an outside party of an implementation of all or part of the program. That's where you see them competing head-to-head. Great question, thank you. Anything else on the history? Let me spend a few moments on the economics of the industry. First, I've worked with very small teams, privately held companies, publicly held companies, but one of the things that I've observed over my 30 years is the economics of the industry tends to hover around a profitability of about 20%. So generally, after you pay all the bills and you pay all your people and buy all the data that you need and pay all the airplane tickets that you need to fly around and serve clients, whether you're small or big, the sweet spot tends to be around 20% of revenue, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more. I find it kind of astonishing that over the four eras that I described in the 30 years that number has been fairly consistent, but my observation is that tends to be about where it hovers. For those of you that are not aware of it, the investment management industry, which is an important source of competition for our talent, has profit margins that are generally twice that, which makes it challenging for us when we think about our economics in terms of attracting and retaining talent when the investment management industry is right next door and often competing for that talent. The investment consulting industry has been and I believe will continue to be a good business. We are able to attract and retain talented individuals, but it is a very competitive market. When we think about pricing services, and I suspect this is true for almost all of our peers in the industry, the one thing that tends not to have a great deal of impact on the cost of providing our services is the size of the portfolio. Generally what has an impact on our cost are the things that I've listed here: number of meetings, how much manager research we need to be able to bring to bear. I refer to the number of moving parts. What I'm referring to here is how many different distinct plans are there, how many distinct investment portfolios are there, how much cash flow is coming in and going out, how frequently are the rebalancing events, things that require the advice to be provided. Level of team staffing, some relationships require one very smart person to be there, others require 3 or 4 on a regular basis. And then lastly, I didn't put on this slide, but an important component of figuring out the economics of the cost for us, which is just an oversight on my part, I should have put it on there. It's contractual terms, but what I'm really getting at is the extent to which the service that we're providing presents business risk to the organization that's providing it. Many of you are familiar with terms like indemnification or limits of liability. If not, I know your counsel is. So to the nature of the exposure that the provider of the advice has to an unfortunate outcome down the road does factor into the way organizations think about pricing their services, and the extent to which contracts provide protection, mainly in the private sector, that allows them to be more aggressive in pricing those services than when they're not able to provide protection contractually against unforeseen outcomes. Value is a little bit trickier. I wrote 3 things down here. Hopefully they're pretty obvious to you. Obviously, if the investment program that an investment consultant is advising on is doing well, that should bode well for the perceived value that's being provided by those services versus if it's not doing well. So we never claim to be responsible for the results, good or bad, but we certainly, if we're an investment consultant in the room, feel that we're influencing those outcomes, whether we're advising staff or the board. Second one I think is probably the most important, which is fiduciary comfort. It's very difficult to quantify. I once heard a legal advisor sitting in my chair explaining that the criteria for being satisfied with the legal advice that he was providing should not be measured by whether or not you find yourself behind bars. That it's a more nuanced value than whether or not you're incarcerated. Investment consulting is not quite so stark, but it's very difficult to quantify this sense of fiduciary comfort. But I would submit to you that most fiduciaries know it when they feel it. They walk out of a room feeling that they have been protected, that they have been advised in a way that addresses their concerns, and that they are more comfortable discharging their duties as fiduciaries than they were when they walked into the room. And then lastly, the ability to respond to hurry-up matters. Hopefully you don't have a lot of these, but institutional investors often have events that they have to respond to. A disruption in an investment organization that is advising them, a external event like a market movement of dramatic proportions, or a constituency that has raised a concern that needs to be addressed. And the ability to respond very quickly and support those unexpected events is an important and probably one of the vital roles that a good investment advisor is going to provide you. And again, those are the situations that you recognize when you see them. In terms of revenue, the industry still is mostly retainer. The OCIO part of the business has increasingly moved to a basis point fee. From time to time, organizations have toyed with the idea of converting the traditional investment consulting work to a basis point fee, but the industry has heretofore resisted that. Oh, it's a very competitive industry. We have many, many competitors, whether we're in the OCIO space or the traditional investment advisory space. And then, unfortunately, our costs are very real and very easy to quantify. The value components are much more subjective and difficult to measure.
For you, Steve.
You bet.
Sharon.
That's actually the question I have, is the key components of value, because I think that's a conversation that we've had quite a bit as a board, is, you know, what we know that there's sort of some fiduciary cover that our consultants provide, but I think the big question that we've grappled with is you know, how to measure that value, or like you said, you know, you sort of feel that fiduciary you know it when you feel it. I sort of get that, but I think I've had a level of discomfort at the lack of objectivity of the value piece that consultants provide. Does that make sense? In terms of, it feels, you know, when I came on the board 4 years ago, I think, you know, the sense was you need these consultants because you need them. They play an important role in how we're advised as a board. But I think moving along in the process of serving on the board, I think the question is how do we measure that value? How do we give feedback in a more objective way? And then obviously, and maybe we'll get to this later, you know, compensation. How does that impact? Because it seems like right now it's sort of, you know, we have a general sense, okay, they're okay, and we'll pay them this, you know, this year. We have this contract, but I would feel more comfortable with having more objective measures. And I think the board has discussed if we could have a clearer sense of what we want from consultants, so that when we go through the RFP process, we're making it clear, here are the 5 things that your performance will be measured on. Right. And so that we're being fair to them up front, so that in a year's time we can say 4 out of 5, this is your you know. Yep. I guess that's one of the issues I've had with the consultant conversation, is the value piece and how we can be more objective about it versus just kind of a feeling. Right.
So a couple thoughts for you. So first of all, regardless of how you're using a consultant, having some process to regularly assess them and evaluate them. Here are the 5 things, the 6 things that we were hoping to get from you, and here's how we feel about those. And as I mentioned towards the end, doing that with a combination of qualitative and quantitative measures probably makes sense. To try to maybe be a little bit provocative here, one of the ways you might want to think about how you're using investment consultants is thinking about 4 different roles they might play. Let me just oversimplify, but I think you'll recognize them. The first is a check-the-box fiduciary insurance role. This is scary stuff. We've got a lot of money here. We want to make sure that if something goes wrong, we had an advisor. You probably have to have that. I would submit that that's not worth a great deal of value to you, other than an insurance policy that you must take out. The second role I would describe as a sage advisor, a person that comes before you with wisdom that you don't possess, either because they have experiences that you don't have, and they're able to use their words and their knowledge and their expertise to inform you, because they know something you don't know. The third role that I see investments advisors play is, I'll call it a technician. They have data, they've got math, they've got models, they've got tools, they've got stuff that allows you or your staff to make better decisions because they've got they've got the Cray computer that can do what needs to get done. And then the fourth, and I would submit to you, is the most valuable role, I would describe as partner, somebody that maybe has a lot of data, maybe has a lot of experience, but their main function is to come into your room, roll up their sleeves, and figure out how to work with you to produce a better outcome than you've experienced, or make sure that the good outcome you have experienced continues into the future. That last one is the one that's really, really hard to put a price tag on. You know if you've got the data that you need, and you're getting, and mostly an organization like yours is going to rely on staff for that type of access. And you know the second role, I think, pretty well when you see that. And then the first role, you know you need to have the fiduciary check the box. But as you think about it, and most investment consultants will have some combination of all four of those, maybe with more of an emphasis on one than the other. But as you think about how to determine whether or not you're getting a good return on your investment, you might think about those four buckets and which one you really feel like you're not getting enough of, and how to ascribe relative value to the four.
And I know Paul's. I think that's actually very helpful. So thank you. And I think the partner piece is key. I think to Paul's earlier point, in times past, I think there's been a blurring of, does the consultant, did they understand they work for us, that they don't work for staff, that it's sort of that the staff have consultants, but that we need sort of an independent view. And I think we as a board like to hear conflicting opinion. We like to hear all different sides of an argument. And so I think that's been an issue in the past, is sort of that maybe lack of clarity about who consultants, for whatever role they're hired for, if they're hired for the board consultant, whether it's audits or, private equity, that they understand that it's to be our partner as a board. Does that make sense? And I think that's been an area of kind of, I don't know, it's been vague or misunderstood maybe perhaps in the past in some of our relationships.